From beyond the farthest reaches of our galaxy they come. Two brains pulsing with a strange energy. These space brains come to share their love of science fiction movies.
Hi, welcome to Space Brains, the show where we joy-watch sci-fi movies and then talk about what was good and what was great. I'm Surrey, and this is Mark.
Hiya, tonight it is episode 66, and we're talking about the science fiction film The Dish, which came out in 2000. So in this episode, we'll reveal what we thought about the film, the ins and outs of narrative, plus some film language, and then a deep dive into a specific piece of science that the filmmakers are proposing. The Dish was directed by Rob Sitch, who also co-wrote it with Santa Chilaro, Tom Gleisner, James Kennedy. They are the Working Dog production team. They've done a lot of stuff together here in Australia.
A lot of stuff. Although they did we know them most famously in Australia for their comedy skit shows that they put on.
The Late Show. And, of course, the classic film, The Castle. Not at all sci-fi, but a great Aussie classic film. It was the film that was the one that they did before this film, The Dish.
Yes.
But before we go any further...
Look, turn back now. If you haven't seen The Dish, I recommend you go see it because it's a great, heartwarming, slightly funny, dramatic, very interesting look into Australiana, and there's science. So go watch it and then tune back in.
Warning.
It's
so full of science, this film. Real hardcore science. So The Dish is basically about a remote Australian community populated by some quirky Australian characters, and they play a really key role in the first Apollo moon landing. So what was your number one takeaway from The Dish? Sorry?
My number one takeaway from The Dish is that it's possible to have a heartwarming and yet humorous and dramatic look at science. And also, I'm surprised at how much pride I got as an Australian from watching this film. It's kind
a bit patriotic.
Yeah, they really kind of keyed right in there and made me realise that we did play a big role in the Apollo 11, and it also made me realise that the Apollo 11 man landing on the moon was a freaking big deal. Like it
was huge.
Think about, this is a person on an entirely different, no, not on a planet, but certainly not on the Earth, somewhere else. Like that's science fiction. That was in '69. See, nowadays we've had space shuttles, we've had launches, we've had space stations and satellites.
Richard Branson
there's
slicking his hair
been probes
back.
and robots on Mars.
Drones all over the place.
It's kind of it's something we just take for granted, I think, a little bit now. But at '69, they've come out of, there's still Cold War. They're still coming out of World War II and, communist fear. And yet here's this incredible event that, people who were able to launch a rocket and get people onto the moon, well, they stepped out and, just kind of did it because they wanted to see if they could. It turns out they could.
Yeah, real sort of sciencey mind about the whole thing, right? Like, and I must admit, the film captures, I think, because it was before I was born, but it captures what I've heard people watching it at the time, like, relatives that were older than me, etc. They're like, oh, we all huddled around that one TV and we watched the moon landing.
And amazing.
And in other films you've seen, like them huddling around TVs in, department store windows, and just that kind of real awe and respect for the science, I think, of, this man landing on the moon. And I think with this film, the way they've done it, and we'll come to it later in the plot, but it's like, they've really mashed in, I think, that feeling that people had when it happened.
Yeah,
the
realization of it's kind of a pinnacle achievement of mankind.
Yeah, and I think in the film it depicts people being in that awe and silence, like watching what's going on and what they're going to say, and it was so epic, and they capture that, and I love that. I really love that myself.
I think, sadly, from my lifetime, there's only 2 bits of footage that I've watched which has had a strong emotional impact on me.
Yeah.
And one of them, of course, was the trade towers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You didn't want to see it, but you couldn't not see it.
No.
And the other one, it was like the smart bombs hitting, Saudi or Kuwait or wherever it was in Operation Desert Storm, the first one.
Yeah, right.
Like that was just watching these images of missiles just sort of flying in through windows and down. Again, a terrible image. I would much prefer to stare in amazement as people land on the moon for the first time.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're going to get that same thing. Like we had, as we joked last time about the billionaires flying up in space, and that's really quite an achievement. But it's it doesn't fill you with much awe. And I think even people landing on Mars, as amazing that's going to be, it's we land on the moon before. It's not that good,
Yeah. I know it's going to be interesting, that, isn't it? When they do land on Mars, will it have this same effect?
I can't help but feel it'd be a little bit. It might depend on the social scene at the time. What's going on the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Is it well? It leads me to the next question: is this a movie of hope, a warning, or an experiment?
I think it's hope, because this story does. It's what we were just talking about. Like it's a milestone moment. People will get into it, but actually, this film takes the perspective of this Australian impact on the Apollo mission, and the hope part to me is that there's kind of this joke in the film, and that's what these guys do really well in their storytelling. Is that real Australian attitude to things, and in this case, like a radio telescope working for NASA, we still, as Australians, can't help but sort of be the underdog and a little bit cheeky and silly about things. Like, these guys were really scientifically smart in this film, but they didn't focus on that much, did they? They focused on the fact that they felt like they were the underdogs. Like, NASA was breathing down their neck.
You think I'm a bloody galah, walking around with the arse out of my dax.
That's right. But it was also just like the attitude to the whole thing seemed very tongue-in-cheek. Even the scientists were tongue-in-cheek, and that's, I think it's a real credit to Australians that then. However, there is a major dilemma happens in the story, and they get down and they work on fixing it, and they fix it. And again, that's what I mean by that underdog spirit. So I can't help but feel by the end of it hopeful that in this context, like, NASA needed the Southern Hemisphere. Australia has the biggest radio telescope in the world at that time, and I think they still do probably. But because now we have that SCAR project here in Western Australia, don't we?
We've got the Parkes is now the second in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. Tidbinbilla in Canberra got upgraded to 70-metre diameter.
And we do have that SCAR, the radio telescope project out here, which is the biggest lot of. It's not one. It's all of them combined.
That would be the real big fish of telescopes.
Yes, it would be. Anyway, to me, there's a lot of hope.
I should have, touched on wood before I said that joke. Okay.
Yikes! What was your first impression? Have you seen this film before?
No, I have not. I did watch
cracking
the castle, and.
Cracking the virgin olive oil over that fish. Sorry,
virgin olive oil on that fish. Yes, that's a strange way of putting it, but sure. It's the first time I've seen this one. I do love the way these guys have written this story, and the previous ones as to the castle. If you're not Australian and you try to watch the castle,
it's hard.
It's probably difficult.
No, I've done it with international students as a thing, and some of them get it. Some of them kind of get bits of it, but they don't quite get it. It's almost like, and it's what happens in this film. Like you just said, you say with my dax hanging out? He's like, what?
My arse hanging out of my dax.
Yeah, and he's a bloody drongo, and that's and I kind of get the tone.
Yeah, it's you're watching the castle, and the castle is so packed full of Australiana.
I know.
Even all the background scenery and equipment and props are all just
the cars, everything.
It's just exactly what's in the background of my house. When my mum opened up the pantry cupboard doors to have a look inside, there's the pack of CSR sugar, there's the Wheat Bix, there's the Vegemite. Anyway, so I appreciate it. And so when I was watching this, and it rolls in, we get this beautiful opening scene of going up the drive towards the telescope, and there's the sheep paddocks, and it's clearly looks like maybe it's spring or late winter.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Because it's green.
Yeah.
In case you were wondering, in Australia, it's only green here in winter.
Yeah.
You can tell Mandra's coming out of winter now because everything's green.
Yes. The flowers are blooming and the weeds are tall.
Sometime from sort of mid to late November onwards, it's basically brown.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just that gorgeous scenery.
Yes.
And the particular film grain they use in this.
Yeah.
Which is also similar to the castle. It has, I don't know if that's actually a particular Australian, like obviously this is an effect they're putting on. They don't have to, but I'm thinking maybe it must be an Australian traditional, film stock that's available.
Yep.
Like, because that particular film grain is I don't know, I really associate with Australian films.
Yeah.
And just looking at coming in, and I kind of breathed out a little bit and relaxed into my chair, and I just felt homely. It was a very cozy movie, this one. I really liked watching it, and I felt very comfortable. And as I said, you see some of the scenery and things, you go, that's Australia. Like, we often get Australia portrayed as other countries, like we saw in Love and Monsters.
Yep.
But this here got a chance to sort of go, nope,
this is Australia.
Thousands, millions of square kilometres look like around Parkes.
Yeah.
Like, you get over the Blue Mountains of Sydney, which is where Parkes is on the inland side. Right. And you get in there on that side there, because I grew up in Canberra as well, which looks exactly the same. And because it's on the inland side of the Great Dividing Range, which is part of the Blue Mountains and so on. And just from there onward, in until you hit, the desert. Yeah. It's just like that. It's all just granite boulders, low grasslands, stands of tall eucalypts. Yep. And in winter, it goes green, and in summer, it just turns brown. And the skies are that just clear blue, and it's just, it made me feel like home. I went, and that's what I remember, because I grew up in Canberra, which is all just like that. Yeah. And we went to holidays like in Jindabyne and, Yass, and so we didn't go to holidays in Yass. We drove through like Yass and went out to Dubbo and things, and it all just looks like that. The whole bloody, like, you can drive for hours and it looks just like it does in Parkes.
I know, it never changes, does it, that scenery?
So I gotta tell you though, what about you? Is this your first viewing?
I saw this at the movies, and at the time I remember being a bit bitterly disappointed that it was not as funny as The Castle, but I really enjoyed the step up in the sort of quality of the cinematic kind of stage, because 2000, that's when I was at film school, and I remember going in with such high expectations, because I loved what these guys did with their comedy show, The Late Show. I absolutely loved The Castle. That was a film I probably saw 3 or 4 times before the year 2000. I still remember, like, it was probably one of the Austin Powers maybe being another one that I literally was like rolling around in the cinema chair. Quite often you go see comedies and you laugh, but that rolling around laughter. So I must admit, I went in with this with high expectations, and I think I probably cackled in the first 10 minutes just expecting it to be so funny. But then it becomes like this really warm-hearted movie, This time, looking at it from the point of view of sort of science, what I really appreciated was how much they did delve into the actual science of the radio. Don't know the exact word, but of the radio signals.
The basketball.
Yeah, the basketball analogy. 2 basketballs or 1 basketball? 1 basketball only has... No, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
And it bounces off this basketball onto that basketball.
Yeah, that's right. So, not a great analogy, but that's the comedy. And I did think that actually this time round, I think some of the comedy is actually quite a mature amount of... there's mature comedy in it. So there's moments of...
Like you might call it... a believable amount of comedy.
Yeah,
Like if
yeah.
you were around some good-humoured friends, it's that level of comedy.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there was nothing... The most outrageous thing would have been that Soldier Boy.
Yeah.
There was kind of a little bit much, but then
Yeah.
again, I have kind of met a couple of people that are...
And it was
in that way.
1969, so you
Yeah.
got to put that in the context of like the draft and, you know, like people actually, you know, being a bit more militant. We've lost a lot of that now, I think, in our
When
society.
did Australia enter the Vietnam War?
Oof.
Is that 73, 60, 70?
I don't
Because
know.
I'm
to
just
be
wondering
honest.
if that was
Yeah.
actually part of the joke of this, was him going, "Oh, I wish there was a war," and you're
Yeah.
like, "Nobody. The next war that we're involved in is not
Well,
one you want to be
Nixon was
involved
the
in."
one that ended Vietnam.
Yeah. So I
don't
think it was
know,
going
yes.
in 69.
So I think Vietnam was happening at the same time,
Yeah,
wasn't
but
it?
I don't think Australia was involved because otherwise he would have been over there.
Yeah, well, Australia was involved, but I don't know when we were involved. Yeah, but I know my dad. We did have the national draft and also compulsory service. My dad missed out. Like when he turned 18, that was the year they stopped it, and otherwise he would have done it. You know, and it was like one of those. Like his older brother was like, you." You missed out on it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know, some sort of vintage around there, you know, but I don't know. You'd have to. That's a Google
No,
question.
my dad left Australia
Ran away from it.
to do his PhD in nuclear physics.
Oh well, that's
so,
smart. Yeah, that's smart.
So he
They
was-
probably wouldn't have put him in.
They
there.
don't. They weren't drafting PhD students.
No. So yeah, I think second time viewing, I liked the science. I also appreciated much more how they mixed in this archival footage to tell the story, I think, than maybe on my first viewing. So I'll talk a bit about that when we get into the plot later. But yeah, I liked how they brought in this real footage to actually add plot points to the story. So as you said as well, like the awe of us going to the moon, like of achieving something, why we do that. Well, you remember right at the start, we have that little bit of speech from JFK saying, by the end of this decade, the end of the 60s, we will have a man on the moon, like it's a real...
And we will go there not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
That's right. So it's like that's a plot point. Like it was setting up. This was that, and you notice that after that, then they did a montage of like rockets exploding and blowing up, and even people being, in coffins, soldiers, military, and then more sciencey stuff happening, experiments. So they really showed you that it wasn't just as simple as, hey, now we're on the moon. It was like 10 years of constant
that
science
was
and trial
Apollo
and error.
11.
Yeah.
There were 10
There were 10
prior
before that.
Apollos.
Yeah.
They didn't try and fail. That was the first one
No.
to actually try to get to the moon.
Try to get the moon.
The other
yeah.
ones were doing various preliminary orbits and launches and so on.
Did you have a favourite scene?
Favorite scene would have been the asking for a date. I mean, of all the
okay.
scenes, oddly enough, that was it. And because
Sort of the B story.
yeah, saying that at that moment when they're each going, do you want to say something? No, nothing. Nothing. Don't. It was beautiful setup of the B story, mimicking, like the we're going to do it, we're not going to do it, and then taking the risk. But it just connected with me because it does remind me of some awkward moments of my own past.
Definitely.
Where, I never took the risk, unfortunately. Not until I was old enough to regret it. No, but so I really another scene that was really very well done, I think, was the party with the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And the way that you've got this expectation and the pecking order and like that's sort of the power making people, it's verging on the border of bullying, or is it inspiring?
Yeah.
Is
right.
is he being a good leader by going, of course there's not going to be any problems, we're going to do it, aren't we? And the other guy goes, yes, no problems. Like where maybe he was trying to back out and, what they call set expectations is the term. But yeah, I like that it had that feeling. It was borderline bullying, because you know what they say is you don't fuck up. That's it. That's what they say. Don't fuck up.
Yeah, that's right.
I was wondering, analysing after that, seeing going, was that leadership or was that bullying? Was that, sort of providing that inspiration and that, what do you call it, the mandate to continue to push, to strive, to reach higher? Or is it someone just being a bit of a mean bully trying to push his way through ignoring reality?
Yeah. And that's a fine line sometimes, isn't it? Yeah.
And I like that because in part, leadership is that of just like, we are just going to do it.
Yeah.
Like, you can come up with a million reasons why it won't work or why it'll fail, but we're just going to do it, aren't we?
Well, yeah, and I guess that's that going back to that's that JFK speech, isn't it? It's like, well, we're gonna do this because it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, JFK was not the scientist. He's just saying, as a politician, let's go and do this, and it's going to take 10 years. It's going to take longer than I can be in power, and unfortunately he didn't even lose his power from that point of view, but wasn't voted out, was assassinated. But it's that concept, isn't it? It's like, well, he was setting the agenda, that tough tone for scientists to go off and do something over the next 10 years, and that's a strong leader, really,
Okay, so here's a good question for you then. Is this really a science fiction film?
Yeah. Well, it's science. Is it science fiction?
Interesting.
The reason why I actually picked this movie, I picked this movie because I felt like this is a good way for us at Space Brains, or especially from my point of view, to say, hey, here, films that are full of science, I think, come under the sci-fi realm, under the genre. I personally am putting them into that genre. Like, maybe we should also look at a documentary, and that is science fiction.
Oh, how fiction.
Like, how far do we go?
Well, I don't know.
I will say there is some fiction in this because Parkes was not actually used as the satellite.
It wasn't
right?
the first. He picked up after Neil Armstrong said, one small step, one giant leap. It came in after that, so we didn't get the historic moment.
No,
but
in the film, it's there.
It's, and the Prime Minister was at Gladstone or whatever. It was a Honeysuckle Creek or whatever it was.
The only one that was there. And there was also like a team of NASA guys working here. It wasn't just one guy kind of like checking in.
And none of the characters had those names.
No, the characters are all made up, and obviously some of the other storylines. But that's pretty normal when we do take a doco, like a solid idea and turn it into
took the important points. The important points was Parkes was this kind of, big risk of a telescope.
Yep.
Which got to be involved. It was heavily involved.
Yeah.
There was a windstorm gusting up to 110 kilometers per hour, which is well above what was needed, and they managed to keep the signal.
Yep.
So these things are in there.
There's some points, yeah. I guess, is it a science fiction? It's not in the traditional definitions of sci-fi, but I want to make the argument that it is science enough in the story to make it a sci-fi for Space Brains. But what do you think?
I think it is because in the definition of so we've got a scientific premise, and so it's not a fantastical or fictional premise.
Yeah, it's not speculative science.
But the effect of it, of the moon landing and the awe, the hope instilled through science, and the pressure of trying to get this moment right. Because could you imagine if the moon landing was screwed up? If they smashed into the moon and crashed and burnt, like what terrible effect would that have had?
I know.
Or if we didn't get the audio and video, and they just okay, they did it, but we don't have any record of it.
Don't have any proof.
Yeah, or only the NASA people have proof of it.
Yeah,
everyone else in the world is just kind of going, well, that was a big waste of my time. I didn't see anything. So the science, if you took that scientific element, what other feature of or recent event in humanity has had that effect that you could substitute in there? You couldn't substitute anything else, I don't think. A sporting event? No.
Yeah.
Not really. There's a lot of inspirational stories and so forth, but this was a science victory for all of humanity.
Yep.
And if you took it away, you wouldn't even get a very interesting movie.
No.
Because even though I knew, of course, that we got the pictures and did land on the moon and so forth, allegedly. Let's not bring that up.
No, I want to actually bring that up, sorry. I do.
Okay. But
I'll
anyway,
let you finish your sentence.
Yeah, so that's why it's science fiction, because we took a historically scientific significant event around which a beautiful fictional story was relayed, taking the science out of it would not have left you with a beautiful story. It would have just left you with kind of a rather boring period piece of people sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like Downton Abbey.
Well, it would. If you took out the science of this film, there isn't really much of a film left. I mean, it's probably a bit like an episode of Home and Away or something, really. Like, it's not. There's not much. The drama would be
a few
Glenn,
of the stars are from Home and Away.
Glenn asking Janine out.
Yeah.
that would be the A story. It'd have to be that. But okay, so you heard it here. You heard it here. The dish is a sci-fi, according to us. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Tell us. Yell at us. Share a comment. Share the reasons why it's not a science fiction.
Share this episode with all your friends, especially the rich ones who want to give us money.
That's right. Tell us that we're wrong. But, okay, so this is the other thing, sorry. I watched this and a little aha moment happened in my head. The conspiracy theorists that think that the man did not land on the moon. It was all a setup. Kubrick filmed it in a Hollywood studio is the rumor, right?
Yeah.
And there's proof of that. You can look at the footage clearly, all this sort of stuff. There's lots of that information out there. Go down a rabbit hole if you've got nothing else to do with your life. I personally have always believed, no, that's bullshit. But when I watched this time, I thought, well, hang on. Doesn't this prove that it really happened? Because this film details how they lost the spaceship. They found it in the last hours. They were the ones that had to pick up those images, and that only worked by pushing the radio telescope to a particular point to collect that video, right? Doesn't that mean, like, these guys that ran that mission here in Australia, if NASA was just projecting those images to Earth, like, how would they be able to project those images from the space shuttle up on the moon?
Well, quite simply, this team of NASA people that were with them.
Yeah.
One of them was a shill. All the rest thought they were reading the signals.
Put it in a VCR.
But they lost the signal. When it comes back on, in comes the video.
In comes the
Actually,
loop.
no, hang
the
on.
loop, like Speed. You know the movie Speed where he loops
Hang
the
on,
video.
hang on. 1969, we didn't have videotapes.
No, we didn't have it, so they can't use video.
They would have had to have like big reel-to-reel type.
Yeah, film, literal film projector.
There would have had to have been quite a bit of technology involved.
Yeah.
But maybe the entire NASA team was in on it, and you could.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, how you could have, because you could say, oh yeah, when they lost the radio signal, in fact, it was just down the highway in Parkes. They took over a hotel room and they projected from there up, beamed a signal to this radio signal, and in fact, they made it that particular time of day so that they didn't have to beam it in. But that's not true, because these guys were tracking that signal up at the moon.
That's the thing. Every conspiracy theory falls apart from the sheer number of people who have to be involved in it.
That's right. So that's your last defense cause. You could say they're all in on it.
Yeah, you could do it, but the number of people starts growing geometrically.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's no longer just Kubrick and a closed set of cameramen and sound, and then the film processors and
20 Hollywood executives.
And so you're not just talking about a couple of hundred people anymore,
Yeah.
like trying to keep a secret amongst a couple hundred people, right? But now you're talking about scientists the world over and amateur, astronomers who were watching with their own telescopes, and other people picking up these signals on their radios, and they're all in on it. Anyway.
Because even these guys at Parkes, like we just said, Parkes were collecting it, but Honeysuckle were too. And like, see, it's all of them. Like, it's not just...
Everyone's
all the one had to be on it, like a huge conspiracy.
Every conspiracy requires...
massive...
Every conspiracy requires thousands of people all in on a conspiracy, and they all stay silent for some unknowable reason.
Yeah. Well, that blew my mind apart when I finished this film, because that was a bit of an aha.
I had the exact same thought. I was like watching it going, this is just one of those things. Is like, the people who are in there, they're genuine people. I mean, the people in the movie weren't
the
really
fictional
there,
versions, yeah.
But how would you, as you said, like, to organize and set up a worldwide, like, they didn't have the sort of satellite technology and internet and all that we have now. Now, we could actually just position a satellite in the right spot and beam the signal.
You could beam the video, right? You could do it now.
You could do that.
Yeah.
But at 69, they'd only just gotten people into space.
Yeah.
They didn't have, massive arrays of, space satellites doing all this stuff.
But you would have had to go on to the point, in my understanding of this, you would have had to go on to the point of like the spaceship being near the moon, projecting back images, fake images that you'd already pre-recorded.
Yeah.
Like what would be like, but the spaceship's already at the, like it's almost there at the moon. You're just not doing the landing bit.
Yeah, I know. Well, I have heard variations of the conspiracy saying that they filmed Kubrick's version and kept it in the can in case they didn't make it to the moon.
Yeah, okay.
And now some of his footage has sort of been mixed in to give additional footage or something. You're like, there's some variations here. There was another variation which is they did launch a rocket. They did launch a rocket and it went through a certain trajectory and but it wasn't going to make the moon. They were never going to make the moon.
They were never going to make the moon.
And so they were doing like, and all these things you're going, at that point it's easy just to go to the moon.
Yeah.
It's the 11th Apollo mission. It's
literally easier to go to the moon than the
They could have just
conspiracy.
gone, okay, the 11th one is this experiment. Okay, we got that. Now the 12th one, they did like to 13 or whatever it was. So like, it's not, I don't know. It's a bit funny.
So,
that aside,
are you up to anything creative or science fiction related?
I have been working on still working my script, my TV pilot script.
They take time.
I know because,
Because we work.
Work
for money.
If anyone's ever tried writing a creative story beyond the first couple of pages, you always get to that point about a third of the way in. Sometimes you get to 2/3 of the way in where you start wavering, going, have I gone the right direction? And you just got to go.
It's the dark night of the soul, sorry.
You know what? I just got to complete the draft.
Yeah.
And then break it into chunks and have a look at it, give it a bit of analysis. If I get it down, it's done. The other thing, of course, is organising. We've been organising this launch party.
Yes,
for the
film festival.
Film festival.
Yep.
Film festival launch party. That's coming up in the end of October. Mm-hmm. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be fun and games. It's going to be local celebrities.
Us.
And then I said, well, we're trying to rope other people in. We'll see who can get along. It's just, trying to organise a successful party is not as difficult as getting someone on the moon, but it's not as easy, for example, as just hosting your own birthday party.
Yeah. Not when we're trying to make it as what Space Brains deserves, a bit of a launch, a bit of a kick out into the atmosphere, a bit of a kicker.
A bit of a recognition so that
rocket fuel.
People can see that we're good fun and it's great to be involved in science fiction and
get involved with
filmmaking
Space Brains.
and listening and watching.
Definitely.
And reading and writing and yourself. You're
doing a bit of editing, writing, planning for the future of creativity for myself. I am in between jobs and that is unfortunately going on a bit too long now where, there's a lot of time being spent on that process. So kudos, high fives, pat on the backs to anyone that's trying to find a job and can't find one, a bit like what I'm going through. It's a bit of a soulless exercise, really. But something will come. But I am trying to stick my, grubby little fingers onto where time is available into more, planning other creative stuff.
Well, I know your wife has been making use of your editorial skills for
her
filmmaking.
Yeah, and camera. We did get to go to her little art gallery launch. Her film was part of an environmental art gallery launch, which was really great here in Mandurah. Chasm, go check it out if you're local to Mandurah. It's all about the environments. I think it's on for about a month, so that was good fun. And speaking of what's happening in Mandurah, just a little nod to the Sci-Fi Film Festival, which will happen on Saturday, 21st of May, 2022 in the Fish Trap Theatre. There's plenty of time from here to make your short film. We have passed the early bird. Definitely by the time you hear this episode, we have passed it, but we have actually passed it. But there still is 2 or 3 more laps around the sun or around the moon, like our Armstrong. How many times do they go around?
I don't know. You're sort of breaking up there, I think, a little bit.
We're going too far down there. But plan for your trip to come to Mandurah. That's the other thing. Coming
to Mandurah, like May 2022.
Be a nice time of year.
You should be able to come into Mandurah. It's beautiful. It's just cooling down.
Get on the train or the car or the boat.
We still have sunny weather in May.
Spaceship.
I can tell you right now, we still have some sunny days there.
We do.
Come on down, and if you're hanging around end of October in 21, in 2021, October, then keep an eye out. You'll be hearing more about our launch party.
You will. So let's get into the plot and the details of the dish.
The dish. So let's talk about what's the brief of this. You say it's directed by Rob Sitch.
Yeah.
Written by Santo.
Gelara.
Santo's... How do I say
He also
Santo?
did
Is
the
he
camera.
Santo-O?
No.
Because it's
Santo.
Robbo.
Santo.
Tomo.
Jano.
Robbo.
Jane. Robbie.
Santo.
Robbie.
O.
Tommy. We can do that. You can do Santy, Tommy, Janie, Robbie.
Robbo.
Robbo. Jano.
Santa's.
Does Jano really get... I don't know. These people are not going to want to speak to us. Sorry now.
Well, I know. I'm going to... I'll reach out to them and see if
Apologise
they can
for
tell
the
us
way
what
we...
their nicknames are.
Look, if you're Australian and you're out there, can you tell us how to pronounce these names? Because we don't know. We're going down a dodgy path here. But yeah, they're a big clan, the Working Dog Productions, as we've been talking about. Now, good old Sammy Neill. We have already done a Sam Neill film before.
Neill, yeah, and I think sometime in the future we're going to do at least one more. There's got to be a Jurassic Park at some point.
Yeah. That's very true. Kevin Harrington, Tom Long, and American Patrick Warburton.
Patrick, well, no, sorry, I can't do his voice.
Putty.
He's got a very distinguished voice.
You know Putty?
No. Putty.
From Seinfeld.
Oh, yes. He's in that scene, yes.
Yeah. I remember when I watched him, like, it's Putty.
No, I just...
The jacket.
He was the mad fan, wasn't he? He'd paint himself up as the devils and...
Yeah, he went out with Elaine or something for a little bit, but he had the jacket and it was always like, Putty.
So it was filmed in Australia. It was 2000. The biggest Australian film in 2000.
Yeah, right.
At the time. So $17 million box office from Australia.
Yeah,
which
huge.
We've only got 25 million people.
Yes.
17 million return.
It's a good return. Like
good.
we've had a few films over time recently. The Dry came out with a $20 million box office in January this year, which was great. Eric Bana was in that film. Something like Red Dog got somewhere around 20 million when that came out. The Dish. There's not a lot of Australian films that reach, over those couple of mil at the box office. Some of the big Australian films you can think of, it's just a couple of mil. So when you get these films that are like 16 or above in the Australian market, it's fantastic. I don't know what this film costs, but I do know it had a pretty healthy budget compared to The Castle. The Castle was made for next to nothing, and yet The Castle made about $20 million.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where they made their money, and they put it back into this film. But yeah, I would say it was probably the average Australian feature film is around $4 to $5 million. So yeah, they've probably done pretty good on a return with 16 or
and
so.
That's right. I know this actually went international as well.
Yeah.
And did fairly well. Like it's a nice story. Again,
it's a chock top bomb movie, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like you should sit down and
it's lovely.
It's lovely,
it
nice
made me
movie.
feel nice and warm, but not in sort of a what do you call it? Like
a dirty way,
not a slushy way. Not like a
not a smoothie,
way.
sucky way.
Yeah. No, it was nice. Again, I'm wondering how much non-Australian audiences we get out of it.
No, I think unlike The Castle, because that's the thing. The bits that are real ochre is Mitch to Al, and Al's Patrick Warburton.
I guess
and they sort of almost like explained it, didn't you know what I mean? So they explained those.
And that
jokes.
was kind of the comedy of it. Is that you can imagine, if you were from Scotland or from Texas or someplace, you might be watching it going, what the hell is that guy talking about?
They basically defined it.
But Al is sitting there going, oh, what the hell is this guy saying? I sort of get the tone, but I'm not really sure why he's referring to galahs and Dax.
Because there was a lot of Australian honor in the way that people were dressed and the way they reacted and the way they talked about it. But it was only really Mitch that really threw those, the colloquialisms at Al.
He loved it.
And they were explained. So I think this would fly pretty easily internationally, especially English-speaking audiences.
If you're from the other side of the world, either Europe or the Americas, and you've watched it, tell us how you sort of went with the Australian scenery and the slang and the language and so on.
So we like to break our narrative down with some common elements that you can find from all good story script writing teachers, referring to people like Campbell, Snyder, McKee and Field just as some, but there's a lot of crossover. Basically then where there's a solid 3-act structure, and then we break that down into some specific moments, scenes, or beats. So we don't need to focus on every single scene in the film, but thinking about those significant beats in the film.
Yeah, so we have Act 1, which is the introduction. It is the establishment. It's what sets us all up for the story and lets us know. So it has like an opening image. It gives us an idea of what theme is going to be in this, like sometimes you've got to take a risk. It usually has some sort of a catalyzing event, a inciting incident. Something happens, which is that point in the film at the start where you go, aha, the story has going.
Begun.
This is what the story is. And then we come to Act 2, and as we go into Act 2, that's where we should have an idea of what the story, where the story's heading. We may not know the final answer, but we know what the question is.
Yeah. And Act 2 then really is the characters kind of decided to come into Act 2. They've made a decision, they've come in. And we might get a bit of a B story, which quite often is the romance. But essentially in Act 2, what we're seeing is, the fun and games, the story develop. The person has decided to quit their job, come into Act 2, and now they're out there looking for a job. Has anyone got a job? And and they're looking and they're testing, and maybe they're a delivery driver one day, maybe they're a relief teacher another day, maybe they're painting walls another day, or doing gardening. Just for example, all the skills that I could do if you've got a job out there, or write a script. They decide to be a script writer. So all of these things are kind of happening, and it's a pretty big chunk of the story. And in a way, it's the bit that I think as an audience we're kind of like, "Ooh, yeah, this is fun. This is this is."
It's where the trailer comes from a lot of the time.
I mean, if it's a horror film, we should be having some of the scares. People should be being cut up or slashed up.
It's sort of where the most people die.
It is, right?
The monster's revealed, and off we go.
We have an exact midpoint, which is what it is, like a middle of a story where it turns more serious. Things get bad. In a sports movie, they might win the game that gets them into the playoffs or the final series, or maybe make them miss out on it as well, depending on where the story is going. So things get a bit worse, and we can start to have, the bad guys they get a bit more power, or the things that the goal of our key protagonist starts to get a bit tighter. In Die Hard, he's starting to overcome the terrorists, but he's got to kind of kill each bad henchman one by one, right?
Yeah,
so
up
he
to
gets
the
there.
midpoint is where he's like yippee-ki-yay, and
Yeah,
I've got it.
But now
he's
got to take on the big guys,
later on.
Yeah. Anyway.
After the midpoint, that's because I love Die Hard, right? So
yeah, I know Die Hard.
After the midpoint, that's where his wife is discovered to be his wife.
That's right. That's
suddenly
great,
the fun and games have come to an end.
The fun and games are over.
Now it's serious.
And we get things like, we're going to have a moment where someone does die, or the death of a goal, with the team loses their final and they can't play on to the grand final, whatever it might be. And there's got to be some sort of death. And that leads us into, I joked before, the Dark Knight. So, yeah, whenever I sit down, I've got a great idea, start writing it. I mean, why is it always about 3/4 of the page that you go, I don't think this idea is any good anymore? Like, why is it always 3/4? Like, it's always the third. And that's what I think in the timing of a movie, it's about 2/3 through the movie or 3/4 that then suddenly there is a moment that these writing teachers say that something needs to die. And there is something about that. If you set off with a goal, whatever it is, you get about 3/4 of the way through. It must be some sort of human emotion that we kind of go, I don't know if I want to keep going. Like, I want to give up. I want to quit.
On my hard drive, I've got 3 novels at about 60,000 words.
Yep. So about 3/4, right?
About 2/3 to 3/4 of the way. Someone's like, I want to get to about 80 to 100K,
And my wife just had it with her doco little series, exactly when she was so close to the finish line of editing, basically going, they're all shit, I don't want to know anything about them, should I just delete them?
Yeah.
You know, and I've seen that with her before. I've seen it with myself before, and I don't know what it is. Anyway, so it is in a plot point, and then pretty much, I suppose the thing is, you decide, I'm going to finish that book, Surrey. I'm going to write it.
I'm going to take the risk.
It's going to be shit, but I'm going to do it, right? Like, I'm going to just get it done. And that's what a character does, and that's what drives us into the third act. The character has to make a decision to go, yes, I'm going to finish writing this novel. And once they do, we're in the third act.
The third act is the finale, and the third act is quite fun because it's where they've got a plan.
Yep.
Like they can see what their goal or their challenge is. They've got a plan. They go tackle it, and they just immediately win, and everything's easy. No, there's almost always a hitch.
There is.
They go in there with their initial plan, and they go to tackle it, and they find actually they haven't learned everything they need to. Because if you look at this as a growing journey, and this is often the way we're thought, we would look at a story is the growth of here. So they're going with that plan, and they've come a certain way, but now the theme is they've sort of learned something about the theme of the thing.
Yeah.
So in this one here, I think early on, Sam Neill's character says, my wife said you got to take a risk.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to take a risk. And that's where it is here. So they're getting the antenna and so forth, and they've overcome the power outage, and they're going, right, now we just have to align the dish. The windstorm comes in, and this is it now. Oh no, do we just not do it?
Yeah.
And they take a risk. We've learnt that because the B story, Glenn took the risk.
Yeah, and the mayor took the risk by building the satellite.
Yeah, and they sort of look at each other and they go, yep, we're doing it.
Yeah.
And then they overcome that little boundary and they find the real challenge and they win because they've learnt this progression. This theme has come through. And that's why I think some stories fall a bit flat is where that theme as a lesson and that slight downturn before the final victory isn't well established.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of, that's where you get those movies or films where they just kind of trail off and you kind of go, I don't, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go. So that's the final. And then we get like a final image of we see the new world, the aftermath, the having satisfied this victory, and we're there.
We are, and quite often the finale and the start are sort of bookends in a way sometimes.
Yeah.
And this film definitely did that, right? So we start with you mentioned it before, the sheep paddock. It's a beautiful big wide shot. Australia looks lovely. It's green. It's lush. Those film colours are at the extremity. It's a good question. You said before, film stock. Well, this is shot on film, so it's pre-digital. So it definitely has that film look to it. I do remember that they spent money at the time because the castle wasn't shot on 35mm film, whereas this was because it's just more expensive. So this was just shot on pure grade film, but it was also being coloured. And I think it's just that colour saturation has been pushed to the extreme.
I think it's like an Australian colour.
Yeah,
because I've said that about some of these European shows and movies I've watched where, like particularly say German and Scandinavian films. Like if you watch that TV series Dark on Netflix, and then you watch the one called The Rain, which is is Swedish, and then there's another one that we're watching, Ragnarok, which is Norwegian. They've all got this same coloration to them. There's the same sort of
bit blue and whitey, isn't
blues
it? Yeah.
and greys and things in there.
Well, the other side of it is in Australia, the sun is so bright, and I'm not. That's a joke, but I'm not joking that photographers and cinematographers know that. So f-stops is what allows so much light into your camera. Like that's what f-stops are. So literally in Australia, the joke with photographers is that you have to drop it down a couple of f-stops. And there's also it's pretty fruitless to shoot in the middle of the day in Australia, whereas in other countries it's fine.
Yeah.
So, we all have the same sun, but it's just, the way it is
different
here.
atmosphere.
Yeah. So I think when you started to list off Norway and Sweden and those northern European countries, well, they're icy countries. So you can imagine that the light is very whitish blue. You know, now you can overcome that with gels and filters and stuff. Even onto when, like back in 2000, you're talking about film cameras, you can add them to lenses. But yeah, I mean, if that's what you're shooting in, that's what you're shooting in a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, you're a bit restricted to the environment.
And you get these look when you look at the Mad Max.
Yeah.
Both
yeah,
like Fury Road
yeah,
and the old
even
ones.
that one, yeah.
You get that same sort of, I don't know, a hard look
colouring,
to it,
isn't it? Yeah.
And
it's
Pitch Black was filmed in Australia as well.
Was it? Yeah.
And
okay.
that also had that very
They had that same
harsh
look, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we get a car driving through paddocks. It confused me because it was clearly a late 80s car. And I was like, I thought this was
Ford
69
Falcon?
or something, like a late 80s.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a new one either.
No, it was
so
old, yeah.
we're probably in the early 90s maybe is what we're
yeah.
dealing with here. And yeah, it pulls up to the dish and dude gets out, grey hair, old Sam Neill.
Yeah. It's an old Sam Neill.
Walks up. yeah, there's not many young Sam Neills around.
No.
I mean, in the film he's 50, so, you know, hey. He walks up and looks at the dish and sort of
Admires
does that sort of
takes the hat off.
Takes the hat off and really looks at it. And then you hear the voice comes in, "Oh, sir, yeah, you've come up the old way. The visitor centre's round the side, just down the left there." And it's a fairly Australian accent, like just to establish that you're definitely here in Australia.
You are in Australia.
That's me.
And you're a silly old codger, so off you go.
Yeah, go on, Brent. So this is me putting on my Australian accent. In case you were wondering, I normally speak with a more neutral Australian accent. This is the real Australian accent.
The real Australian. And that's where we cut to that first example of real footage, JFK saying that, you know, the man will walk on the moon, and we kind of open then to the film, and there's this beautiful then sort of setup from there that, you know, there's all this old archival footage, NASA sending, you know, the rockets exploding, military people being buried, more rockets exploded. A lot of rockets got exploded. Lots of failed sort of starts to mission, and then some success, you know, like a rocket in space, and, you know, more NASA stuff and satellites being built and those kind of progression. It's a great montage with a really great 60s song attached to it, and it's basically showing us that 10-year progression, I think, to get us, because then it brings us back into the film, and it says July 1969, Sydney, Australia, and we open to this classroom where kids are doing little scale models of
they've all
what's going to happen.
Footballs wrapped in tinfoil.
Yeah. It's a nice little touch, because then a boy's saying what's going to happen with Armstrong going around the moon, and he sits down, and then a girl student hops up, and she's actually got the satellite dish that's at Parkes, and the teacher's like, thank God.
Yes.
She's just heard 20 people talk about
Some other kids who had to stand up with a silver football and a rocket ship, yeah.
What do you got there, darling? Oh, it's Parkes. Oh, yeah. And so that's the nice cut. That's the nice cut into Parkes, really. And we see the satellite again. And this time it's not what Surrey was saying before, the 80s or the 90s. It's back in the 60s. Yeah, so we learned pretty quickly there Sam Neill is actually being interviewed by a reporter, and he's explaining that, well, yeah, NASA wants to use the radio telescope at Parkes to beam the images back to Earth, and he says it's the most powerful telescope in the not what I've got written there for some reason, the southern hemisphere, which to me makes sense. I mean, that's logical. We're introduced to Patrick Warburton from NASA. Cliff, Sam Neill is he goes, I'm the director, and they sort of joke Dishmaster, and Mitch is the guy responsible for moving the dish around.
It's the dish pilot. I guess.
Dish pilot. And Glenn is on electronics.
He's the computer nerd.
I do like, it's like, again, in reality, I looked a bit into what was reality, and they said there was a team from NASA, and I think there was actually more than even these 4 Australian guys.
There would have been more than 5 people in that room.
So it's kind of, again, downplaying what I said at the start, a bit about the underdog stuff.
But you've got to pull in just the prime characters.
Yes.
Because we want to see characters. We don't want to see a team from NASA, because a team isn't a character. Because even if you had a team from NASA, you'd still only have 1 or 2 people in there who had personality.
Yeah. And
time enough in the film to show personality.
even though it's a cheeky way of introducing these characters because he's been interviewed by a reporter, even within them, like Mitch straight away is extreme. He starts joking with the reporter about some personal things about Glenn, you know? And so it shows you that he's a bit of a jokester. Even Al is very polite and diplomatic, and he says something like, "Oh, I'm really appreciating the warm, respectful, loving people in Australia, and they're very nice to me. They've been very welcoming." Like it's a very diplomatic response. The way he's dressed as well, it's like a very professional black suit, whereas the Australians are all a bit more casual. Glenn, on the other hand, is really timid and doesn't really answer the question very, positively or proactively. He's pausing, he's and then Cliff, Sam Neill is smoking the pipe, and he's very confident, and he's very, assertive in his space.
It's a very fatherly figure.
Yeah, very fatherly figure. And then the reporter nods back to them saying, "Oh, it's funny that, we're going to get to watch this moon landing, and it all goes back to you four guys." And they're like, "Oh." And, I think the reporter says something about, do you feel any pressure? And Mitch is like, "Well, I do now, you bloody drongo." Yeah. So it's a nice sort of little setup, isn't it? That this is our little team of.
We also do get the questions about your personal life. So we hear that, and primarily this, I think, is just to introduce the fact that Glenn is single.
Yes.
And Cliff is
married.
Anyway, and moving on, and so you immediately know
there's
either
a little
he's
thing
divorced or she's dead or something. There's something wrong with his marriage.
It's complicated if they had Facebook.
Yeah, well, as we learn later on, actually, it's not. She's dead.
No, she is dead.
So,
I don't spoil it yet.
it's
Sorry.
sad, but
It is
not
sad.
complicated.
The other bits in this setup is that the town of Parkes is getting super excited. The Prime Minister is excited. The US Ambassador is going to visit Parkes.
The local band is practicing.
Playing Jimi Hendrix.
They've learned James Hendrix. They've learned a new song by James Hendrix.
Yeah. There's also like them kind of polishing and getting the dish ready. There's a bit of a montage of that. And then the mayor also does get an RSVP from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister back in Canberra. No, it wouldn't have been Canberra back in those days.
No, it's Canberra.
Is it?
Yeah, the old
Okay,
Parliament House,
okay.
yeah.
I did look. I don't exactly know my history. It's just the old Parliament House.
The old
isn't it?
Parliament House, yes.
And that's why I didn't think it was like, is that in Canberra or not? Yeah, okay. And then he sort of like, he doesn't get why, does he? He kind of like has to realize what's the point of this bloody telescope in a sheep paddock or whatever. And then he says, but then when he's in Parliament House, he's like, "Oh, this is going to put Australia on the map."
Yes, it's the greatest thing ever.
So he uses it like all good politicians.
Oh, and he got the. I love the mayor's offsider. He says, "Oh well, yes, of course. Remember what they said about me when I said to put the telescope here in Parkes? Oh yeah, that you're a bloody idiot. That you shouldn't have done it. It was a complete waste of taxpayer money. No. They said I was a visionary. I was a dreamer. Yeah, that's what that was. That was a good little bit of political humour there.
Yeah, and that's that humour, isn't it? That's in this film. That it's a little bit more like the undertone of conversation humour. It's not like jokes. It's the way people talk about things.
It is definitely an Australian, a subdued Australian humour.
It is. Yeah, and the other thing is we sort of learn pretty quick that the guys... and Mitch and Al have a bit of differences. And the reason for that is it seems that the NASA guy is taking it extremely serious, but the Australians are just taking it a little bit relaxed. There is then an official announcement that the Parkes radioscope will be the one and only collecting those images. That's been the decision by NASA. And so to me, that's the catalyst, because then it was like, now we're locked in.
Yeah,
we are the ones.
We got the moon landing is I think what they got told.
Yeah, they got told that you guys will be the ones when the moon landing is happening.
Because they've been involved in the various telemetry as they've orbited around the place.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me that's the thing, and because there's mention in that kind of moment in the film that 600 million people will be watching live, and so it's like
600 million.
you will be responsible for that. And then they do a joke about, well, what are the Indians going to, how are the Indians going to watch it?
Oh, yeah, they'll watch it probably around the 1 2. Yeah, I love, it was clearly what do you call it, a culturalist joke, making fun of Indian nation for its backward nature. But they filmed this and delivered the scene quite well because it was that pause which allowed it, that they showed self-awareness. So they're going, we're going to say this joke and we're aware that it's not accurate because India is like, a leader amongst many technologies. They've actually got their own very large telescope array and so forth. But in 1969, the Australian attitude was not good. But they nicely had that little pause before the mayor cut in with, yeah, they'll watch it. Pause.
Yeah.
Probably around 1 TV. Like they're all sitting around 1 TV. I don't quite get.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's I did appreciate that self-awareness moment where they're going, okay, we're going to say this, and we do mean it as a joke. We are aware of what it sounds like. Now we're going to say it.
Now we're going to say it.
Yeah, so it's quite good.
So we get into kind of, the debate. We're seeing them play cricket on the radio scope.
Well, they're testing the alignment of the dish.
They are.
Aren't they? Because with the rolling of the ball to see how it rolls. But to do that, they play cricket.
They do.
They clearly do play cricket there more than once because there's wickets drawn on the fish.
And Mitch, he bitches to Cliff about being disrespected from NASA, and Cliff is like, we've got to kind of get on with it. There's also kind of Cliff kind of hiding something about his past, again, kind of nodding back to the married thing.
Because he's the one at this stage who's not showing a lot of excitement.
No,
for what's going on.
He's been very reserved. He's been the dad in a way, like he's not been overly emotional about it. Because he's been like that at the same time, like people in the park, I'm glossing over a few scenes in the film here, but there's a lot of excitement around town. There's the town hall, they're getting ready for the concert and all that kind of stuff. They're getting ready for people. And there's kind of mention that Parkes might be the new centre. There's a good vibe starting to happen. And that to me actually also is then we break into two is the moment that then NASA, and again, we see this through some archival footage. The guys are watching it at the station that the mission of Apollo 11 takes off. And so it's, a successful launch. So again, it's like going, well, yeah, now they're in space. We have to do our job.
It's very symbolic of Act 2.
It is.
Isn't it? Okay.
It's a literal Act 2.
We've set everything up and now we're going to go into it.
Yeah. So you guys we're going to be responsible. Okay. Now, you guys are the only one. You're doing the moon landing. Okay. Well, the only thing that can go wrong now is whether they actually launch or not. Well, now they've launched.
Yeah.
Now, it's your turn to shine.
Yeah. Now it's up to you. And so we do get the B story.
This is when the B story introduced.
Jeannie comes in.
Yep.
She has her basket and she comes up and hands out
terrible driver.
Sangers.
I don't know if that's really a very good joke.
Yeah, no, I sort of cringed a little bit that they had like a blonde girl reversing into something. And I'm
Let me just say, she is wearing some lovely outfits in this, Janine. It's a good fashion choice for the 60s. The mini skirt is in there. The little picnic blankets.
She had those jumpers on.
Yeah, it just was very 60s vibe. I really liked it.
Yeah, so she came on and handed out sandwiches, and when she hands one to Glenn, she goes, "Oh, I put extra cheese on yours like you like it." And Glenn's like, "Oh, yeah, thanks."
And Cliff, being the dad, keeps going, why don't you explain the science to her? And why don't you show her around? And why don't you take her to your bedroom? And why don't you just...
We're going to take her from Gladstone. So if you think of a basketball, you got a valve on top, and that's where we are. Yeah. And then there's another valve on the bottom.
I loved this explanation.
And then Cliff is like, so was it 2 basketballs? No, but you can... Yeah, you don't
Imagine a basketball with 2 valves.
Imagine a basketball with 2 valves. Fortunately, she cuts on and says, I think I get the idea.
I get the idea.
Which is good because she's...
Well, I will say that even though they had the driving thing, she seemed to get the understanding of it, not from so much the explanation, but actually it seemed like she genuinely understood it. It wasn't just like...
She sort of already knew,
I think she already knew.
She just was giving him the opportunity to talk. To say something.
Give the man an opportunity to talk, sorry.
Because he doesn't talk very much.
No.
Yeah, so anyway, we get a bit of the, as we say, the fun and games as prime ministers are coming along, ambassadors are coming along, and we
get
have
more real footage of the mission progressing. You know,
yeah,
there's
we get
science.
some interesting sort of what you call it, interactions with these people.
Yeah, we do, and there's a nice montage of like checks and balances on the radio dish, you know, like them maneuvering it. There's some lovely shots in there of it kind of panning around. There's also a nice, you know, kind of like them, you know, doing all their science kind of to it. And that's quite a good thing.
Talking to NASA, like real professionals.
They did. And that actually does lean into the ambassador is coming to town. And when he's coming to town, actually Mitch has had enough of this kind of American NASA arrogance.
Oh, yeah.
And he does confront, and that's what we're joking about, where all the colloquialisms kind of
talk about
spill out.
Treat us like we're a pack of galahs.
Yeah.
It's a kind of parrot.
Parody.
But see, that doesn't actually help with understanding. It's like, why do I think you're a parrot? What the hell? You're the parrot. You're repeating what he's saying. Like, yes.
You're a bloody drongo.
A galah is a silly person. In case anyone's wondering, if you're driving your car and they cut you off, you go, well, that's what a galah.
But anyway, so that they have basically, Mitch confronts him over that, and it's not settled. Al goes off to the ambassador's dinner party, and that's all fun and games. They're celebrating. The mayor's having a good time. The ambassador's having it. Parkes looks good. There's a good joke in there that they play Hawaii 5-0 as the national anthem, and you know that's that dry Aussie humour sort of playing out. And then all of a sudden there's a blackout.
Oh my god!
Oh my goodness! And it's a nice way of doing it because the blackout happens, the town goes dark, the party goes dark, the dish goes dark, and then when it comes back on, straight away the ambassador just, you know, the mayor says to the ambassador, "Oh, I hope you're okay," and he goes, "There's no skin off my nose, but I hope the dish is okay."
Dun, dun, dun. The mayor says, "Oh yeah, they've got all backup generators and such."
And there's a nice cut here because he says, "Oh, well, we should just ask Al," but Al's not there when he was just standing there.
Yeah.
And it just cuts from him like racing in his car, you know, because in his scientific mind, he's gone, "No shit, a blackout. Yeah, this is trouble."
Yeah.
And so whilst he's driving up, the others realise that the computer's gone blank. You know, there's no backup, they can't call Microsoft back in these days.
They didn't have a hard drive to store this information on.
But all the coordinates blank, everything like that. Mitch also realizes that the generator didn't work because the fuel pump wasn't primed, and that was his job to check that.
Yeah, he fixed the fuel pump
lines,
and didn't prime the lines.
Didn't prime the lines.
Yes, and they don't have like some sort of fuel injection system. They got a carburetor system, so it's not going to work.
Now, signal's off. What's going to happen? NASA's going to call, and they call and they go, "Hey, the line's off."
Is this the midpoint you reckon yet?
No,
we still got a little bit more.
Because this is all the setup. This is all the fun and games of, well, this isn't just a movie of them following Apollo 11 and doing everything perfectly.
No.
This is actually things aren't going to quite go as right.
Okay, so
anyway,
loss of coordinates. NASA calls and says,
and
"Hey."
Cliff lies.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh no, the signal's all strong here."
Yeah.
That was a pretty good Sam Neill I just did, actually.
Yeah, that was it. We'll get you on set. We'll do some, you know, automatic dialogue replacement.
I'll do it for Sam Neill in the new Jurassic Park movie.
Yes, I'll act as his body, and I'll put a hologram over me.
And then they lied to Al. They just don't reveal everything about the generator to Al. And Al was like, you know, we should tell NASA. And they say, well, how long? I like this as well because it's 1969, the computing technology. It's like, well, how long is it going to take to do all the maths? And Glenn's like, well, 12 hours, maybe 24 hours. You know, like,
well, he's got to program it all.
They've got and you can, you know, it's a wall of computing, you know, like, and I liked that because it was just you can really see how far we've come with computers, can't you? You know,
can't just stick your thumb drive in and get the new copy of it.
No. And then again, it's also in the film terminology. It's like, oh, there's a time clock here, isn't there? You know, like they will come online in maybe 12 hours, but the math equation might take up to 24 hours,
Yeah.
like to do the job. We could do it, but we just need more time.
Well, this is part of the Hitchcock direction for tension. The difference between tension and action.
Yeah.
Is it action? So the example he gave is you got two people at a desk and a bomb goes off. And there's like, okay, so that's surprise.
Yeah.
That's startling and that's action, but there's no tension.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a shot where the camera can see under the desk and see there's a bomb there.
Yeah.
Now we've got a bit of tension.
Yeah.
Now we can see there's a clock on the bomb and it's ticking down to 0 and the two people are having an infuriatingly slow conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
That's tension.
Yes.
And that's what we've got here. We've got a clock ticking down to 0 with a bomb and people have too much to do in that time.
Yes.
And that's it's a really easy. It's a good, convenient, useful way of introducing some tension, particularly here because we do know the outcome.
Yeah.
But we got to see how it gets there.
How it gets there, yeah.
And so if they'd have just gone, oh, it's off. Okay, now it's fixed again.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a bit of action then where it went off, but there's no tension.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful.
So they all kind of start working. They all think about what they're going to do, and the mayor rocks up to check, and he agrees to the lie. Like Cliff tells him about the lie, and again, there's sort of a humorous moment there with the security guard, not recognizing them and stuff.
He's funny.
Doing his and the mayor's like, well, yeah, you should lie. This is a shithouse moment. So again, it's like, yeah, should we do this? Australia, should we lie to NASA? Yeah, we should. Let's just try to figure out. Like, that's what I liked about this one at the start of the whole purpose of talking about this film. Like, I liked that there was this attitude. It's a real Australian attitude of like, well, she'll be right, mate. We'll fix it. We'll get there.
Use of the phrase shithouse.
Yeah, shithouse is always good.
Shithouse.
And then Al, they've told Al enough of what happened, and he's, we should tell, but he decides to lie to NASA.
Yes, he's going to be a team player.
Yeah.
Although later on he confides with Mitch and says, the guys at NASA, they make mistakes all the time.
Right,
They're not superhumans. Yeah. They would have understood if you'd made this had happened.
If we'd actually just said,
and we could have worked through it.
Yeah.
And there's why'd you lie? It was because we probably would have just become backup.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
So
anyway, there's a nice little montage here again. There's a few montages in this film, but there's a nice little montage, like working all night long. They've got that great big chalkboard, like Goodwill Hunting, and they're doing all the maths and scrubbing out things and talking to each other. And Al's reading the NASA. I don't know why he's actually reading that book again, but he's reading that book, and they're all working in their own way, aren't they?
Yeah.
And then also together on this big thing, and there's that good old, and there's a beautiful when there's that whole thing happening. There's this real. You say this film made you a bit patriotic, and there's that patriotic music definitely at the start and at the end of this movie, and as we get to the climax of the film. But in this bit, there's also this really sweet, inspiring music. It's not, you could also put under this montage like dun 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 dun, like them trying to figure it out and scrubbing stuff off and scratching head. But they actually made it a very sweet montage, this one, and it was the music that did it to me. So it's a nice moment, and I guess to me that gets to the midpoint because they don't solve the problem, right? There's a scene the sun starts coming up, and they have a little argument about, well, we could just shoot it in this direction, but it's a huge bit of space.
Yeah,
and they haven't
if we
solved
had a
the
reference
problem.
point.
Yeah, the reference point, and then I think it is Al, isn't it? That kind of goes.
He looks out
and he sees the moon.
Yes,
and he's like, "Well, why don't we just shoot at the moon?"
Point it to the moon. That's where they're going.
That's the reference, right?
Yeah.
And then I suppose work backwards. That's the way. And they're like,
Yeah.
"You're a genius, Al. This is why they pay you the big bucks." But it is. It's a moment of like, and then so to me, that's actually the midpoint. It's a false victory. This one, like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we can find them again, and that's what they do. They literally do that, and they shift the satellite around, and they get a response.
Aren't they wonderful shots of this huge dish? It's a 67-meter wide dish.
It's massive.
Whereas, as they're saying here, about 1,000 tons or something or other, shifting just beautifully, smoothly. Like, I have a feeling they sped that footage up a little bit because I don't think
they might have.
I think it moves very slowly.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a nice false victory leading into then, okay, well, things are going to get serious. But, there's going to be a couple of... They have a moment. Mitch and Al have their moment together. He apologizes and he explains about what, like you just said, is about the NASA guys make mistakes and, they all think they're the hot shot and, but they're not necessarily. And that leads into that kind of, the dark part. And the dark part is that Cliff reveals that he lost his wife and that she was really excited about the satellite and NASA and the moon.
This is also the turning point. This is that death which inspires Cliff.
Yeah.
Because when he thinks about it, who's he talking to at this point? Is he talking to Glenn?
Yeah, I think so. Because he's been kind of telling Glenn,
saying,
you need to take your risk with Janine. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where he said, she was excited. This was her dream, and she didn't get to look. Didn't get to see it. And then he says, "But I think it kind of excites me a bit too."
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is, he realizes that if he just mopes over it, he's going to miss out. Because he was kind of, I think he was saying something along the lines of, she's not here to see it with me, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what's, that's dampening my mood. But I think he's realizing that if he doesn't take in the moment, well, then he's going to just miss out on the moment anyway. So he might as well...
You'd regret that, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
you'd be looking at it back going, my wife actually would have liked me to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I just sort of...
so it's Cliff's turning point and it's then Glenn's turning point.
So I think that's that death that we talk about that inspires. Because it did... And Cliff, Sam Neill, I think, brilliantly portrayed this, that... Yeah. He is a little bit lighter,
yes,
and a little bit more energetic throughout the rest of this film. Here.
Yeah, and so that does lead Glenn, to sort of resolve that B story. Is he finally bumbling, going to ask her out?
Awkward moment of a car.
Where you brought me a sandwich, and you bought it. Okay, well, what are you doing Friday night? Nothing. What are you doing Friday night? Nothing. Well, there's lots to do, isn't there? Oh, there's so much to do. Oh, this whole NASA thing's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting. Do you think it's exciting?
And I love that bit though. He walks up and says, "Well, I fixed your bumper," and he's holding a sledgehammer. So it's a bit of a joke of the old cars.
Yeah.
And for this whole thing where he's, talking to her, he's got this sledgehammer, which might have seemed a bit intimidating in any other situation, but it's just such an awkward moment. Yeah. It's even more awkward that he's holding this big heavy tool.
And we've all been, I think we've all been there. I think these guys are a bit older, older maybe that when we get past that stage. But I remember standing around a car, not having the guts to ask out this girl and, and having this stupid kind of conversation with her and she's having it back with me.
You're looking for the
looking for the moment and you're in your brain, you're like, just ask her. And she's probably saying the same thing, but, and like standing out and out the front of someone's house, like I dropped something over accidentally as a reason to go to that girl's house and then be like, oh, okay, and just sort of standing out the front of the house for like 2 hours, awkwardly not just saying the freaking question and then finally saying it, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay, let's do that. You're like, oh, fuck.
Because they're relieved now because they went, oh, finally.
Finally he's asked me out. No, actually, I don't want to go out with you.
Yeah, finally I don't have to ask. Because, of course, there's a certain point in that awkward exchange where if you were rational, you'd go, the only reason this person's hanging around and isn't nicking off is because they're waiting for me to
say something.
They're either waiting for me to provide an opening for them to ask, or they're waiting for me to ask. Yeah. And as an adult now, of course,
you can understand that more.
Ironically, though, I'm happily married, so it doesn't actually come up anymore. No. But it's
what it doesn't. So and she says yes, so they do. So it's a nice rounding off of that B story. So the point then it goes to is that they get the response from NASA that they're going to use Parkes for the moon landing. The moon landing's come forward a little bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, they're not going to have their sleep.
Yeah, they're not going to have their sleep.
Which, as the ambassador says, and I agree, is like, could you imagine it? You landed on the moon, and then they say, okay, go have a sleep now.
Yeah.
Are you bloody kidding?
That's right.
I'm on the moon.
Who planned that?
This is something I've been training years for, and then I've waited 4 or 5 days sitting in a little capsule for, and I'm now on the moon, and it's just through that door. There's no way you'd rather have a sleep.
No.
You'd
Buzz, I need to get out there and get some air.
Yeah.
So, but
I'm
the
going
thing,
for a walk.
yeah,
I might be a while.
it might be a while. You stay inside, boss. But they all sort of panic, don't they? Because they're like, well, the moon's not in the right place. We don't have the telemetry right.
Yeah,
We're not ready.
horizon,
We're not ready. You know, it's not. The moon's not even visible from where we are.
At the same time, the windstorm is coming
And
up.
then that's the wind
And
start.
they're not so worried because they're not thinking that they're going to be up so well.
No.
They're thinking there's going to be 8 hours, 9 hours, they
Yeah.
said. You know, it could blow out 9 hours. Yeah, it could blow out 9 hours.
The wind can go, yes.
And then it's like, it's been brought forward. When is it now? Ooh.
You have to kind of get ready now. And so then they're like, oh. And of course, the risk there, you know, is going back to the theme, what you're saying. You know, this whole film's about taking a risk. You know, it took a risk to build this satellite and it's paying off with NASA. That was the mayor's risk. Cliff took the risk to sort of do the job, but was holding back until he realized that, well, just because his wife died doesn't mean he can't now enjoy something, you know. Glenn was to ask out Janine, you know, and then now it's the risk of, well, the winds are really, really damaging, you know, it's 60-kilometre-an-hour winds. It's like a mini tornado or
60
something.
mile an hour.
60 mile an hour, sorry.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty forceful. You know, we don't know if the dish will hold, you know, properly. And it actually is, they say it could, you know, life-threatening. And they actually online, when you look at the historical of what happened, that actually is true. They risked their lives. The safety warning was no, they should exit the building. The dish could have collapsed on them. So suddenly the stakes have raised, haven't they?
Yes.
But then the question of the theme of the film is, do you take a risk? And they've been encouraging all these characters to take a risk. So Cliff decides to take a risk. To risk it. And so that breaks us into 3, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful 3. So the finale, which is great because we have, the mission is progressing. We've got, the telescope moves, the wind rises up really high.
Yeah, it's really, everything's shaking
and they use all of their little skills, and then they go,
push all their buttons, and
the moon's not high enough yet. Okay, we'll do this offset thing. They can do an offset. So it does an offset.
Manual override.
And it's fuzzy. We're hearing Buzz and Armstrong talking. And then it finally comes in. Ba-ching! We get the connection and we get the famous moon. And I've never seen that footage before. Like, I've seen the cleaned up later footage.
Yeah.
So that one there, like, just watching it and seeing the people sitting around it, it really touched me.
Yeah.
I really was affected by it and thought, wow, you know, that was an incredible moment.
Yeah, well, they do this whole, like, great thing in this film where, and they did it in the earlier scenes as well, but in this whole sort of sequence here, it really is cutting from, obviously, the film world, so the film that they've shot, the characters we know now, and their reactions to them seeing that archival footage, isn't it? You know, and so that because their reactions are so real, it does make me feel like that would have been what it was like. And the way they show that is the way that I felt people told me what it was like when they saw that. And you mentioned the 9/11 towers. That's a really strong connection for me. I remember 9/11 watching live. I was watching Rove McManus's show was on live, and that got cut off to the live footage of, you know, the Twin Towers, and one had been hit but not the other. And we were watching that going, oh my goodness, this is devastating. And when you saw that second plane hit the second tower, it was like, oh my God, Armageddon. That's what it felt like. And that's a really negative thing. So but you can connotate then watching something like this. And I think this film does that. You know, the Prime Minister and all those mayor, they're sitting in a room watching it on the television, and you know, these guys at the station are watching it, and then there's the kid at home watching it on his little television, and the security guards watching it on a little tiny old black and white television, and like everyone was just so engrossed in that moment in time. And it's a beautiful kind of moment, isn't it? You know, and the fact that they've mixed this live action archival footage into the film, I think they've done that really well.
Very, very much so. And then we get this lovely little ending, which left me feeling inspired, hopeful, happy.
Happy Sam Neill. We come back. It's a bookend.
We come back to him, and he once again said, so...
look, you're flaming old man.
I do have to ask you to go around. Just around to the left there, mate?
Yeah, and of course he nods his head and puts his hat on and says, and I think he says, oh, maybe I'll do it another day. And he walks back down.
Do I recognise you? I don't think so. And then there we go. I could do Sam Neill as well.
You can. And he walks down as no, that's a different movie.
Actually, I was thinking Event Horizon, but
But it was very that patriotic music kicks in and the end.
The end.
It's a great story of science being shown. So where does it go on your ladder? Sorry. For me, it is going in at number 28, which I know the numbers change all the time, but number 28 means that it goes between spectral and tau. And I think that would be a really interesting, if you took those three in a row and you watch those three, you kind of got that spectral action-packed, modernistic military sort of thing. And then you jump into a film that's very historical science like this, and then 29 you're coming back to kind of really dark, moody, murderous, corporative greed.
The dish would be a nice palate cleanser there.
Yeah, it would be a nice kind of, it'd be like from spectral to that's quite nice. The world's all stuff.
I had to do similar thing in mind here, but I'll put it up number 4 here.
Okay.
So after watching The Lobster, you'd watch The Dish.
Oh, okay.
Which it's kind of a funny lobster dish. Yeah. But
Lobster
because
dish.
I was thinking the Lobster likewise is quite a down to earth sort of film.
Yeah.
And then it's a
With
similar
the
style,
dark
but
tone,
it actually has a nice the dish has this nice uplifting effect.
Yep.
Before you got to District 9, which was another sort of on earth, sort of realistic-y sort of film.
Definitely.
But also a bit hopeful. So that was my thinking there. I really came away with a nice feeling from this movie. It doesn't have...
It is a nice feeling.
It doesn't
movie.
have strong peaks and it doesn't have strong troughs.
No.
But it's got this nice... the characters are friendly and pleasant. And even the interaction between Al and Mitch, which is not horrendous. And it's similar in many ways to the way the characters are in the castle.
Yeah.
The thing I really like in the castle...
They're sweet characters.
Everyone's so nice.
Yeah, they are.
But they're genuine in it. It's not... It's not sort of a false nicety or an over-the-top niceness. It's just that's really what a lot of people are like.
Yeah,
most people you work with and talk to and so forth are like this,
It's very, very true.
So there we go.
And it is an uplifting, warm film, so you watch it and you'll feel good about it. So, what type of science are you going to pick on in this film? Because it was a very sciencey science film.
Well, it has to be radio telescopes.
Of course.
Radio telescopes are very interesting and a little bit difficult to understand, I find.
Yes.
Because unlike optical telescopes, they don't look at the visible spectrum.
Right.
Which is interesting. So the eyeball of the human is a telescope, really.
Yeah.
It's got a lens. It's got a collecting area at the focal point of that lens. And in fact, it is a telescope array. So it allows you to use interferometry, telescopic interferometry, in order to be able to see detail at distance. Yeah. And that's what we do these days. So back in 1961, the Parkes telescope was created. It was a 67 meter diameter dish. Mm-hmm. And then in 63, they built a small 12 meter dish on a track next to it, which they would use then for this interferometry. So, and you can see it in some of these shots in that film. There's like a little dish,
little dish next to it.
And they use that. It can go backwards and forwards, and that helps in ways. Mm-hmm. But the radio telescope, it absorbs or captures and records radio waves, which are just another part of the electromagnetic spectrum, of which visible light is a part.
Yeah.
So it's photons traveling about through space at a particular energy level. And since they all move at the speed of light, being that they are light, the different energy level doesn't change the speed at which they travel, because they always go at speed of light, but rather how fast they vibrate. That's the energy they carry. And so you can well imagine if something vibrates slowly and it's a photon, then in between each up and down, or left to right, or however you want to vibrate it, it travels a long distance.
Yeah.
And so radio waves are at a low frequency, And so they are between, say, 3 centimeters and 10 meters in length. So from the dip of one over a hill and to the next dip, you'll get a distance of meters.
Yep.
And that's why, in order to observe that and capture that, you need a great big aerial antenna to do it, like a 67 meter wide dish, for example.
Yep.
But we have a problem, of course, when you have just one thing observing. So if you point your radio telescope at a point of source of radio,
let's say the moon
things, well, more likely a quasar, because actually Parkes discovered the first quasar as a recordable object.
Right.
So that's this bit of a historical thing. I'll try and tell you what it. What did it do? It. Blah, 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 key surveys. Oh, look, I can't. Anyways, quasars is wonderful.
Quasars.
Radio emitting, stellar objects. If you've got one of those, you point one at it. You imagine these waves as they come from these things that's like light years away, so far away. If you're up really close, it radiates out in a spherical fashion. Yeah, but as you get further and further away from it, just like standing on the surface of the Earth, we can't see much in the way of curvature.
No.
Like it basically, as far as I'm concerned, my room is flat.
Yep.
But really, there would be a slight curvature to it. It's just so small that we can't notice it. And the same thing happens then when you've got a very distant object radiating radio waves. By the time the waves reach us, they're effectively coplanar, as I said. They're flat. They're flat. Walls.
Yeah.
And so when they hit your dish and bounce up, you end up with a central spot that's sort of fuzzy. And then you get dark ring, light ring, dark ring, getting paler. You can sort of get this splash, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, the closer it is, this object is, the smaller that central, we call the airy disc, named after a person. Airy, not because the disc is airy. Interesting. The smaller that gets, until it resolves into a distinct object.
Yep.
And that, what do you call it? That angle of resolution, they call it, is measured by it's proportionate to the wavelength, and we know that radio waves like 10 meters, say, 3 meters, divided by the size of the dish. So the bigger the dish, the more you're dividing it by, so the smaller the resolution angle, which means that you've got less, you can see more detail at greater distance.
Yeah, right.
Is what that means. Now, the problem is you can't make dishes too big. In fact, there's a big one in China that opened up in 2016. It's 500 meters across.
Yeah.
But the way they focus it means they can only use 300 meters of it at a time, only. So it's a big dish. But so, the one in Parkes, 67 meters, if you want to look at something in great detail at great distance, then you need a bigger dish.
Yeah.
But it's hard to physically make a bigger dish.
Yeah.
You need something kilometers across to be useful. So what they do is they get a second dish. And now if you think of the way your eyes work, this comes back to your eyes. So if you look at, let me see, you're standing between two monorail tracks.
Yep.
And they're parallel. And they disappear off in the distance. They appear to converge.
They do.
They seem to converge to
That's
a point.
A trick.
And if you had a monorail on each one of these, like a little car carriage on each one of these, and they went away, there'd be some point in the distance where you couldn't tell if there was one or two.
Yeah.
That's your resolution distance. Like, you just can't tell. Like, they're too far apart. They're too close together in the distance. But if you bring those tracks closer and closer to your eyes, then at any given distance, it's further away you can see before, they become one. Until if your eyes were looking directly down each track, very skinny little tracks to fit under your eyes, then you could close one eye and look through the other, and you'd be able to always see two.
Yep.
And so that is essentially what we do here by wider spacing your eyes out apart.
Yes.
Is what we're doing when we're spacing dishes apart.
Right.
So we get one dish, and then we have that smaller dish which roves out 50 meters, 100 meters off this direction.
Yep.
They point towards the same object, and these waves come down and they hit each dish at a slightly different time. So that gives you its position that you're looking at relative to the dishes. And because you've got two sources of information, you can actually resolve a finer level of detail.
Yeah.
You can basically focus these dishes in on the same spot.
Yeah.
And if you've got two objects, so like there's two cars on the monorail, you can now distinguish between the two at a greater distance. Just like if you brought the rails closer to your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the interferometry part of it is basically the fancy maths they use to figure out which which radio wave is from which telescope and how to add them back together to form one radio wave, image, basically. Yeah. And that's a Fourier transform. It's a fancy bit of maths and trigonometry that I care not to think of. There's calculus involved to get the transform over time and variation, whatever. It's year 12 math, so I've got no chance of remembering that. Anyway.
That's awesome.
But that's
a good description of that.
That's pretty interesting. But here's an event that the Parkes telescope is actually kind of famous for.
Yeah, beyond this one.
So in 1998, the Parkes telescope started picking up these mysterious signals, peritons.
Ooh.
They are like fast radio bursts at the 1.4 gigahertz range.
Right.
And they're going, that is really unusual.
Yeah.
And they investigate it, and it would happen like at odd times.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out, when does it happen? What, is it from some part of the sky? And they went, okay, it's not coming from one particular part of the sky. It seems we think maybe it's some sort of interference.
Right.
So maybe distant thunderstorms or lightning bolts. But they're trying to correlate it with storms that are happening, and kind of, it's not, they go to the Bureau of Meteorology and go, where's the lightning strikes happening, at what time? And it's not lining up very well. Finally, in 2015... Yeah, so it's
a long time later.
17 years of this occasionally happening. Not very often, but every now and then it would happen. Finally, a breakthrough discovery was found.
Aliens, totally.
Absolutely
alien
mind-blowing. Mind-blowing discovery. They found that when the radio dish was in a certain configuration, if someone was heating their food in the microwave and open the door...
microwave.
open the door without pressing stop first...
Yeah.
There's a very brief, like microsecond, nanosecond burst of 1.4 gigahertz as the magnetron that generates the microwaves turns off.
Right.
And so if you've got the dish in action and someone's heating up their food, because it happened at night, watch people are heating up their coffee or whatever they're doing, ding. So there you go. This mystery was solved after 17 years. It was people heating their food in the microwave oven.
Barry. You can heat your spag bog tomorrow.
But anyway, that was Parkes. The Parkes Observatory discovered that. And so now we no longer... It's a bit disappointing though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because they'd gone, wow, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so they discovered it's not coming from space.
Well, the movie Contact, which we'll probably do one day.
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah. They're going, well, yeah, it's like, it's not coming from space. So that's a bit disappointing, but it's still really interesting because we can't figure out where it's coming from on Earth.
Yeah, what's it picking up?
Yes, but there you go. So that's the Parkes telescope, which had only been in operation for 8 years. So it was brand new when they did it there. And in fact, on that set they used in this film, they had leftovers that NASA left.
Yeah, right.
So NASA left a whole bunch of stuff in Parkes in storage for like decades, and probably got brought out and displayed to people at various times.
Yeah,
because it was too heavy and bulky to shift back. And so actually in some of those scenes, some of the equipment that they've got in that office is the genuine material that they have.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the Americans are known to do that a bit, but aren't they? They leave behind the stuff because it's just cheaper to leave it behind.
Oh, well, you bring your fancy tech over and then you sort of set it up and then it's like, well, we'll just make more at home. That's it's not
Let's
a problem.
make it all around. Awesome. So what did you guys think about the dish and the science that Surrey just talked about, and what we also discussed about earlier with the plot points? And did you agree that this film proves that there really was a moon landing? So hit us up on our socials. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and also our website. A little extra check-in about the film festival. Go out, make a science fiction film that's heavy on radio telescopes.
Interferometry.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I'm sure we can come up with something like that. Or like we're joking about then, Contact had the sound come out of space. Go for it. Make something. Make a short, 5 minutes long is plenty, or 2 minutes, and submit it to the Space Brains Sci-Fi Film Festival.
Just on the point of these telescopes, radioscopes, a memory I do have that I'm quite fond of is back in the 80s, my dad took me out to Tidbinbilla, which is now the largest in Australia, because it got an extension out to 70-metre diameter. So
it's all about the size.
You know the astronomers are swinging their dicks, don't you? I got to watch it move in a position. My dad took us out there and we had a picnic and the emu stole our lunch, and we watched this huge disc slowly, ever so slowly rotating.
Nice.
That was nice. But anyway, with that
good
image,
memories.
You should do it if you get a chance. It's an amazing piece of equipment to look at.
And what's out in WA? We've got the Gin Observatory.
Gravity Observatory.
Yeah, and then as I said, they have built the SCAR multi-country. Yeah, because I think probably what you're saying is right, that they've built lots of those telescopes.
Yes.
To make it then one giant, powerful, and that's that SCAR program. But yeah, they picked the West Australian desert because it was the quietest desert on the planet or something. So, and then there is also some in South Africa that they talk to each other. So it's incredible stuff. You can go online. There's an enormous amount of information about that project. But we don't have time to go into that right here, right now. So do that in your own time. That's pretty much the end of the dish. So as I was just saying, let us know what you thought about what we thought about it. And what's our next episode? Sorry.
I think we're going to go to Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
It's a little film with a friend from the Working Dog Boys, Kim Ginchel.
Yep.
He's not really starring in it. It's the Jackie Chan film.
It's a Jackie Chan film.
It's called Bleeding Steel.
Ooh, Bleeding Steel. I'm bleeding.
Yeah, it
steel.
sounds like an 80s hard rock, doesn't it?
Yeah, sounds cool. All right, well, go ahead, go watch that film like we're going to be watching over the next couple of weeks, and stay tuned for another episode of Space Brains.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, you bloody larrikins, you bloody drongos.